Hey, so I did a previous audio space around $100 million of sales completed, and that was by Jeff Pabst, who is the Chief Revenue Officer at FaZe Clan, and Arena Shimes, who is the Chief Revenue Officer at G2. And jokingly in the comments, Jeff got talking to someone who I hadn't seen before called Mark, and they were talking about, hey, maybe you should do on the other side of the coin, like $100 million spent. And I thought they were being serious, being me, and in the end, we ended up turning into a space. So, you know, Mark is absolutely one of the OGs in brand spend in the space. We talk about it in the podcast, but going from like Antec, which is very similar to where I started, all the way to Intel, with Intel Extreme Masters, then onto Verizon, etc., and doing some of the other work that we talk about. He is an absolute legend. He has so much knowledge, more so than 99.9% of people on the brand side spending in that space. So I can't wait for you to hear this. I really enjoy this conversation, and I can't wait to catch up with him again soon.
You know, what we were talking about, Mark, just before we went live, it'd be a good place to start like this discussion is how we used to operate with like essentially zero budget back in the day compared to today. So I guess for those people listening, like for me, I was at Thermaltake and TT Esports from 2011 till 2014. And for most of the time when I was there, except for like, you know, quote unquote paying internally for review products, and instead of exhibiting at large events like PAX Australia or EB Expo and trade and conferences, my entire yearly budget was $12,000 for Australia, New Zealand. AUD, by the way. So that's like $9,000 USD. What about you back in the day?
For me, when I started at Intel, we had zero budget. What we would do to get to any sort of event is we would actually get loaner PCs out of our demo pool. So like we'd have demos at like CES and stuff, and then they would go into a warehouse. So we would ship like 500 PCs that were just sitting around in a warehouse to PAX, and they would put us literally in the dungeon, and we would, what's the good word? Like conceal like booth elements within those crates. We pull them out, and then we'd actually construct our own booth, kind of IKEA style, back in the day. Like one of the stories I'll never forget is like, you know, we would have product for raffles, but no budget for anything else. And this kid comes in the booth and he's like, I'm here for the raffle. Where's the Intel booth? And I mean, okay, Intel's a Fortune 50 company. You'd think it would be nice and impressive. I'm like, you're in it. And he goes, whatever. And he leaves. Like straight up, just straight up. It's like, whatever. You clearly have no idea what you're talking about.
Man.
Yeah, it's definitely humble beginnings. So, you know, anybody who thinks, you know, big companies just automatically just have a slush fund of, you know, millions of dollars or even hundreds of thousands of dollars sitting there waiting for you to spend. Sorry, like, that's not the way it works.
Yeah, endemic companies have been able to finesse their way quite a lot, haven't they? Like I was talking to a friend the other day who owns an esports team, and I have a charity looking to do some events, and I was looking for him to take it over because I'm not really doing marketing agency stuff now. And I was saying, oh, what about this brand that you work with? You know, maybe they would chuck some money in to, you know, help to donate to the pool. And he's like, you know, you'd be surprised. They find a way not to pay for anything.
Well, I think it's like, no matter how big or small your company is, right? And I came up through the, you know, the ranks of like all the, like the, you know, the channel on the PC side, you know, and like, it doesn't matter if you're Thermaltake or if you're Dell or if you're Intel or any of those companies sort of in between, like you're asked to do 10 and they give you 5, right? Like you're asked to do 100 and they give you 25. So it's just a different scale as far as like how far behind you are in dollars and resources, right? You know, you half of $1 billion of you know, resources behind, or, you know, half of $10 million of resources behind. Like, you know, and that actually helps you be really creative. I think everybody here is waiting to hear about $100 million, but we're sitting here talking about $0. So I'm feeling good about this.
I mean, it's such a good learning experience, right? Because you and I have both seen from the other side, like VC funded, you know, Web3 or non-Web3 companies just paying for everything. You know, they come in the market and they're just like, who do I got to pay to get stuff done? And they don't ask any questions. And they just like throw the cash around. And you just don't, I mean, you don't get a good result. You don't get a good ROI from that, but also you don't learn anything. Like, when I was at Thermaltake, I was the community and esports manager, and I did everything from, I made their Facebook page to would go and speak at universities to I would run like CSGO tournaments and commentate them at the same time, like on a Sunday or a Saturday, in person in the city or online. I think you just learn so many broad skills when it comes to doing that stuff. And like you said with the booths, like I remember the first ever PAX Australia, we exhibited there. And you're right, we didn't pay any money for a booth build. There was like a naval height IKEA table that we built that we put PCs on. The back wall was made up of 2 glass display cabinets that were taken out of shop fronts, and, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we bought a 55-inch TV and shipped it in ourselves because it was about the same price to buy the TV as it was to hire it from the expo company. And we got like some removalists to put everything in there for us from our thing. And we had volunteers or hourly paid, kind of casuals came in and help us build that thing by hand and put it all together.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think we've all gone, I don't know about we all, but you and I have both gone through that process. I remember my first BlizzCon. This is probably BlizzCon 2, I think, probably done almost every BlizzCon since, including the BlizzCon that didn't happen. That was the Diablo 3 launch, which I did work on as well. This is pre-Intel days, and we gave just product, right? And we did, we gave cases and power supplies and stuff like that. So we didn't even pay cash to even go to BlizzCon back in the day. And we did like World of Warcraft, PCs, like art on the PCs. And it was all like fan art. Like we actually ran a fan art contest and put that art on the PCs. And some of our friends over at Blizzard, they're like, can we have this afterwards? And we're like, anything we don't auction off, we'll go to our friends at Blizzard. And last time I heard, years and years later, they still have those kind of one of a kind, cases and PCs that we did. And it's not even like official art. I mean, they have access to everything, but it was fan art and they loved it. And, sometimes it just comes down to what, how close you are with the community, and you're just doing the right stuff with whatever you have.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think, can you explain to people who are listening kind of how the Intel relationship works with like add-in board partners and, motherboard suppliers and retailers and things like that? I guess part of it's for me too. I'm interested to see if Intel works in that co-funding the same way in marketing globally as in Australia.
Yeah, no, 100%. So let me answer that question specifically, and then maybe I'll do a little origin story about how I even got, all that stuff started at Intel. I think that might be kind of interesting because, we spent, 5 minutes talking about zero budget. Let's, start rolling the ball up to 100. So to answer your question, Intel Inside, I think it's called something different these days. But they would co-fund, board folks, full systems. So like notebooks and desktops, and they would do co-funded marketing as long as Intel was part of the equation, right? So if you watch like a Dell ad even today, you get the bong at the end and then Intel pops up. Yeah, there's some Intel Inside dollars funding that. So there's a lot done there. So Intel, Microsoft, those are probably the biggest ones in the industry that are doing it. Obviously, AMD, NVIDIA, they do some of that as well. But I think Microsoft and Intel are still definitely the biggest ones doing a lot of the co-funding. So one of the cool things is when you work at one of those sort of core companies like an Intel, AMD, NVIDIA, you get to see the entire industry from a perspective that nobody else gets to, right? So I worked with a dozen different OEMs, sort of launching their products from the ground up. And it's really exciting because you got to see some folks that were really far ahead, like an Alienware, and then somebody that was new at the time, which was Acer Predator, and now they're killing it, right? So they're doing really, really well. So yeah, that's pretty much how the co-funding and the that ecosystem works.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and just to reiterate what you said, for anyone listening, it's like if you ever hear If you ever hear an ad and it ends with Intel Inside or whatever they're using these days, like
the bong, man, like not the the sound bong.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's likely that, 50% of that ad is actually paid for by Intel, which makes sense because, I mean, and like you said, it's the same with NVIDIA, et cetera, right, too? Because personally, I have a lot more experience working with NVIDIA than Intel. I've done a little bit with Intel, but quite a bit with NVIDIA. And it's the same thing, it's like they don't really sell, NVIDIA doesn't really sell direct. Sure, they've got some founders cards, but primarily it's, ASUS and MSI and, I was going to say EVGA, but not anymore, et cetera, selling to their customers. So they're just empowering them to, put their products out there with, what we call in Australia, MDF, like market development funds.
100%. Yeah. So I'm not going to split the hairs on MDF versus, Intel Inside or some of those. But yeah, it's the same. Let's just throw it all in there and co-marketing dollars. And yeah, absolutely. The big folks are powering, the rest of the ecosystem from behind. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. So we've got from 0 to 50, and then we get all the way up to 100. I wanted to see if this resonates with you at all, from starting from 0 and then building up from there. Because like you said, right, at Intel you started with 0, and then obviously you got above 0 by the time you left there. I talked to Walter from HTC. I think he's at TSM for the past few years now.
TSM now,
years ago. Yeah, and I remember, and I'm so shaky on the details because it was like 2018 when I had him on my podcast. But essentially, the way he convinced HTC to get into the industry was doing a package deal with 2 esports teams who took next to no money. And they did like a co-sponsorship deal with HTC to get them into the space. And for him, he was pushing really hard internally to get into esports. And they basically said, Walter, if you care so much, you can manage it and you can do it. And then he did a great job of it. I'm interested in learning from you. Like, how do you go, using that word, I guess, entrepreneur, like how do you do that internally? How do you convince your bosses like, hey, we need to actually start taking this seriously. We can't be a Fortune 50 company that's sneaking into events and building IKEA booths. Like we got to be doing something. We're number 1 CPU manufacturer in the world by a significant margin. Like we should probably start spending some money and looking as important as we think we are.
Yeah. So definitely that's the right segue. And for anybody listening, we did not rehearse this at all. 100%. In fact, this whole cast started as me trolling the other $100 million cast. But what's interesting is a lot of folks know me in the industry as a marketing person, as a partnership person, esports, whatever you may see from the outside. But I really am, at the core, a strategist, a business person, a business growth person. So that's really my core competencies. And anybody working in this space, you got to have core competencies, right? Whether it's, strategy, marketing, sales, product development, whatever it is, you kind of need to have real business skills. And then you layer your expertise on top of that. That's a good formula for success. So for me, it's actually strategy is at the core of what I do because, I started out, in the marketing space, really, actually running P&Ls and running businesses at, major Fortune 100 companies, including companies like Mattel, where I was running their anime portfolio and stuff like that. So when I approached this as a business problem, right? So it wasn't like, hey, I'm a big fan of video games, which I am. I got into marketing because of video games and my love of comic books. But the problem statement that we had at Intel was that in the mid 2010s, mobile was just kicking everybody's behind. And what I mean by mobile is like tablets and phones. And every article that you saw, in our space was PC is dead. Like just call it a day, and the iPad and other tablets are going to take over. And that was really actually affecting the business, right? So there was actual business effect. So what we did was we went from a product marketing perspective where we said, hey, here's an i7 or an i5, and you kind of sell it out there, whether it's it can go to a government, a B2B, it can go to a consumer, a creator, or a gamer. Like it didn't really matter as long as we were moving the product out. But when you get headwinds like that actually are affecting the entire industry, that's when you have to look at something different. That's the approach that I took as we were writing out the business case for really marketing to segments, to people, right, to gamers specifically. And what we did was we looked at here's the addressable market, right? Like how many gamers are out there? I think at the time it was like 2 billion. Now it's like 2.8 billion or something ridiculous like that. And how much of the revenue and how much of the margin were we a part of? And from a revenue standpoint, it wasn't a lot. It was like kind of low single digits. But from a profit standpoint, we were the most profitable segment, right? So that's where I essentially built the business case out to grow that most profitable segment specifically to the gaming consumers. And from there, I built out the team, probably one of the best teams in the industry. Built out all of our analytics, customer journey, and part of that was also building out our infrastructure and our sponsorships and partnerships. So you can drop 50, $100 million really, really fast as a large company through media. But what I did was actually did an analysis of esports because I had already been working with a lot of teams. So like I may be the only person in the world that sponsored Team Dignitas 3 times at 3 different companies. I'd worked with Liquid. I'd worked with, EG, Twitch early days, even when they were just in TV. So I had, some good experience in that space. And I was like, hey, let's actually do an analysis. So I worked with major consulting companies like Bain, got Newzoo involved. We actually did a bespoke analysis as to, what is the growth of the audience, right? Because there's a value there. The growth of the viewership as the audience grows, and then also the growth of how much it's going to cost to invest. So I'm on the cusp of getting $200 million right here. So what we did was we were looking at, every year investing into esports was going up, let's say 30% on a conservative side, all the way up to 50% year over year. So I did a 5+ year perspective. And I said, hey, if I can do a deal now, lock in the next 5 years at today rates, I'm going to end up paying half of what everybody else is paying. So at that time, we were already doing Intel Extreme Masters. It was kind of a one-off program it wasn't really tied to revenue. It wasn't really tied to much other than, kind of corporate events. In fact, if anybody is old school here and they've seen the OG, like original IEMs, they showed up at like trade shows like CeBIT and other, things like that. And they were kind of almost like, it wasn't like a sideshow. I mean, they were pretty legit, but they were in addition to like another conference that was going on. It was an attention getter, let's call it that. And what we did was we built out a global partnership with ESL, and the $100 million was over 5 years. So, do the math, dividing that, by 5. And what happened is we actually ended up paying, like after, probably not even 5 years, like 4 or so years, we were paying a lot less than what the industry was paying. So we were able to lock that in and hedge that for a long period of time. That also really just kind of kickstarted the whole, esports ecosystem a lot, because that was a big infusion of funds into a place that really needed it. And that also then trickled to teams, that also trickled to really the entire ecosystem. But at the same time, we were also growing our revenue by a lot as well. So we would connect OEMs to each of the programs, like Acer to Intel Extreme Masters. We had major retailers like JD.com. In fact, we did enough business at one of those retailers. I can't get into too much of the details, but the revenue in a single day, in one day, covered my program costs for the year.
Yeah, damn. Back to one of the, like, where you kind of started the story from, it brought me back. It was really interesting. You're talking about tablets and phones and stuff, like a lot of attention being paid to that. Do you remember the era of console ports as well? When it seemed that nobody just gave a single hoot about PC gaming? It was around the Modern Warfare 2 era, the original Modern Warfare 2 that came out.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was a sad time to be a gamer, I got to tell you. Like, it's late 2000s, like early 2010s. It was every PC game was a console port. I mean, CSGO was a console port when it first came out.
Yeah.
the buy wheel and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, interesting, man. And that sponsorship thing you mentioned was interesting too. I remember once upon a time, I don't know if it was when you were at Intel or beforehand. I guess it was. I remember strongly Intel sponsoring like the number one esports team in every region. So sponsoring EG, Team Immunity in Australia. You know, I think it was Tyloo in China, maybe.
We had EDG in China. Was ours.
EDG in China. There you go. Fnatic, I assume.
Never did Fnatic. Well. We didn't ever do Fnatic. We had Dig SK? For a number of years. We did have SK for a while because obviously, you know, the ESL tie-in. That was, you know, that was a pretty close sort of, you know, like we consider like ESL or EFG these days, I guess, as like they were like cousins. Like that's how close we were.
Yeah. Yeah, crazy, man. I mean, yeah, I don't think people understand the impact that like the Intel Extreme Masters series had on esports as a whole. You know, you come out of nowhere with $100 million investment. It kind of is out of nowhere compared to the scale of investment from other, you know, from any other brands or any other companies as a whole. It's almost like you threw an insane amount of capital investment into ESL without taking any of their equity.
Yeah, well, part of it, you know, everything again was built from a business standpoint, right? Like it was a business case. And everything on top of it, like the amount of money versus the amount of money, you know, amount of money invested versus the revenue, like the revenue was in multiple billions. So when you look at it, you're like $20 million a year. Okay. You know, like all of a sudden that you know, we're making that in a day, right? Like those are the things where, you know, all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, as long as you can show that it's driving the business, and not just like, hey, this is really cool. And Mike is here to troll me. Absolutely. You know, it's not just to, you know, for the, you know, the logo slap or the recognition. All right, Mike, go ahead.
Yeah. We'll bring him up soon. In about 10. And that's for anyone else listening, actually, in about 10 minutes. You just got to click like the raise hand and we'll bring some people up to ask some questions. And then you can feel free to. So
yeah, so one of the other things too that we're really proud of is if anybody remembers, you know, like the origin of the Intel Grand Slam, you know, like a big part of that was really looking at like, you know, what's kind of ailing the community, like what's a problem, right, that we can solve, because you know everything that I wanted to do was like our problems for the community, because you can put money in and it can work for it can do nothing. Like you can put money in, it'll do nothing. That's one end of the spectrum. You can put money in and you can grow your own business. But people may not like you, right? Like they may just be like, oh, well, whatever, you know, thanks, but we don't want to hang out with you. Or then you can invest money, grow the business, and also really kind of help out the community. And one of the things was, you know, the Grand Slam, where we were looking and we're like, you know, and a lot of this, you know, is due to the brilliance of our, you know, ESL, EFG friends. There was like 500 plus paid CSGO tournaments a year. And every time things like IEM, you know, like a big one just passed this last weekend, you know, would come up. It's like, hey, you know, C9 or Fnatic, hey, do you want to come? It's like, oh, well, there's like all these other tournaments. Like, oh, we don't want to travel too much. We got to figure this out. When we hit with the Grand Slam, all of a sudden it solved a lot of the problems within the space, right? So it solved one, the viewership problem. What are you going to watch? You're absolutely going to watch a Grand Slam, right? Teams, where are you going to go? Like, how are you going to prioritize? You're absolutely going to, you know, if a Grand Slam event is coming up close to, you know, a different event, like you're going to prioritize the Grand Slam. And then also it really elevated the game and the players. So the players had something really big to go after, which is $1 million bogey. So that really kind of, you know, lit a fire under the players as well. So everybody was feeling really good about the ecosystem, from the viewer to the players to the TOs and everybody in between. I mean, I'm sure there's some people that are angry about it, but in general, it was something where we were able to thread the needle and really make the maximum or the most number of people happy with the investment that we put in.
I'd say you're probably in a small crowd who's made a direct positive ROI from esports sponsorship. Like, I mean, you don't hear a lot of those direct pathway to sales and being able to prove that with revenue with most of these sponsorships. And it's something I want to do a space on in the future. There's a tier 1 esports team who I'm good friends with the sales manager in the US. And, I talked to him about this directly. And he says, like, we warn is maybe not the right word, but, we talk to specific partners about, hey, you're with us for an ROI play. You're getting logos on our jerseys. Don't expect mass click-throughs to website or mass direct sales. But then sometimes they sign the deal, convince themselves they're going to make mass sales anyway. Go through the team sponsorship, and then one of their sponsors dropped off, a hardware sponsor, and it was kind of like a told you so moment. But obviously the way you guys set it up is a bit different because, yeah, I mean, you're making those direct sales, right?
You got to start with the business plan, right? You can't hope that you can't back into it. And I think a lot of folks, kind of get a little bit of FOMO, do a bit of a land grab, grab some logos, and then hope that the money then follows, right? And that's a short-term play, right? Like I've seen so many brands come in and out, and it's like, well, what happened? Well, it didn't work for us, right? Like, well, it didn't work because you didn't build it that way. Like if you built it that way, then if you built the machine to make $1, you can fine tune that machine to make $100, $1,000, $1 million, right? But if you never built the machine on the brand side to make it work, then it's broken. Like it doesn't, don't expect it to happen, right? Like you never built it that way.
Yeah, you're right. I think it's a sponsor and pray. Like there was a big period in esports sponsorship, especially like this, right? It was sponsors were being sold like investors. And I even had, teams coming to me being like, even when I was a brand saying like, invest in us. And I'm like, I'm not getting equity, bro. I need a return. Otherwise I'm going to get fired. Like, I just remember teams telling me like, I'll sponsor me today and I'll be bigger than the team you sponsor in 3 years. I'm like, well, that's not how it works. I need some ROI right now. Otherwise I will no longer be employed at Corsair. Like if I leave Avant and give you however much money.
Yeah, no, 100%. And that's kind of the smart play, right? You gotta start with that, and then you can fine tune it. I'll give some examples at Verizon. So a couple years ago, Verizon reached out and they're like, hey, what you're doing over, I mean, I was a recruiter, but same thing, right? Hey, what you're doing at Intel, do it here, bigger, better, faster, and more awesome. I'm like, all right, challenge accepted. I mean, I also wanted to see if, I would be able to do that, when you start something at one brand, sometimes your identity is actually kind of connected to that brand, like so-and-so from Red Bull, so-and-so from, whatever brand, like sometimes that person and the brand are connected. And I'm like, and I was really proud of what I did, but I was like, I need to know, like, am I going to be able to continue to do this and be successful? Long story short, at Verizon, like I did things in a third of the time that it took at Intel because I already made all the mistakes, 8 years before everybody else. But one of the things is, like I had this hypothesis. I'm like, hey, I can bring down the cost of leads for our new product, which is home internet, by a lot, and doing it through the esports audience, right, versus buying media. And at the end of the day, kind of spoiler alert is that we were able to drive down the cost of leads like over 90% per lead, cost per lead. We were able to get, double digits. Actually, I'm kind of undercalling it because I can't really talk about the exact numbers, but like serious double digits in volume, for the number of leads we can get versus the rest of the company. And, all of it was done with like less than 5% of our sponsorship budget. So, if you asked me like 8 years ago or 10 years ago, like, everybody was kind of more bullish on, like on the land grab. And I was always very cautious. And now this last year, you see a lot of the things change and turn. And it's like esports is dead, or like, this isn't a thing anymore. Everybody's getting out. And now I'm kind of the bullish one to say, hey, if you do things right, you can hit all your metrics. You can do it at scale. You can do it for a lot less money than you might be able to spend. Like at Intel, I was getting almost a 15x valuation versus if I was doing paid media, 15x.
Yeah, wow.
So that's huge, right? And again, it was that hedging. Like we made the bet like years and years in advance, so that we would be able to take advantage of that. So I'm actually kind of the bullish person now on esports, and really this audience, because I feel super comfortable about being able to kind of replicate the success over and over again.
Is there a secret sauce, or are you basically just saying, hey, there's just a basic playbook that I've done 2, 3, 4 times. You just need to roll out the same playbook again. Like obviously there are some nuances in knowing who to work with and having relationships with certain teams and tournament providers, et cetera, et cetera. But, would you say there's just a blueprint that other people could follow and they're just blissfully ignorant to that blueprint that works?
I think it requires both blueprint and acumen. So there's a lot of people that work in the space that are really, really good at what they do, right? It could be production. It could be, the amazing people at sales and biz dev and, making products or, doing creative and making videos or, building teams that super kick ass. I think my secret sauce is being able to connect everything from where the money is being made and the products are being developed all the way through to the consumer, right? To the audience member, and having that understanding from end to end. Because again, I got my start running P&Ls, doing the product development, all that stuff. So that's been ingrained in me. And then all the other stuff I kind of picked up along the way. And I was able to kind of aggregate that all into a very cohesive end-to-end solution. So for me, yeah, it's as natural as breathing. But I think, if anybody else wanted to replicate it, you probably want to pick up some of those skill sets. And I think some of the biggest ones that are lacking is if you're on the brand side, like you may know your products inside and out, but you may not know the industry that well. That's going to take time. If you're on the endemic side, you know the industry inside and out, and you know the consumer, the audience, the fan. But making a product and bringing it to market, that may be a bit of a black hole.
Yeah, because like I don't generally want to get negative with things, but from my personal experience, I'm sure you know this as well. Anyone who's listening, there are endless amount of brands who've not had success in esports. Endless amount of brands, and there's a strong culture. Without speaking out of school too much, there's a strong culture in Australia of a lot of endemic brands who've tried esports and are really burnt by it and never wanted to go back. And I think it's because of that ignorance of not knowing how to do it. So I can't understate how impressive it is without, as we say in Australia, blowing too much smoke up your ass, that you're able to, do such a good result like over and over again, because it's honestly very rare, because I think it's just so different. You can expect to sponsor a sports team, chuck a logo on a jersey, do a couple of meetups and get a good uplift in sales. Like you can actually do that, as well as the sports team is so equipped with their own practices to be able to promote you. Whereas in esports, it's just not, you don't have both of the sides. I remember talking in depth to Larry Kesselman, who's a man here who owns the NBL, the National Basketball League. And I remember him saying like, he feels that esports teams and esports as a whole deserves more money. He said they work so hard, there's so many fans, it's so great, but there's just something missing. And a lot from his perspective, a lot of what's missing is even just the basics of understanding how to do post-campaign reports, making sure you're meeting deliverables, that kind of stuff doesn't even exist. So, I'm kind of going around in circles a little bit here, but it's just impressive to me, because there is really a wasteland of brands who just haven't done a good job at sponsoring esports. So it's impressive to me that you've been able to do this not one time, but multiple at the highest level as well. It's not just like you're spending 100K and getting a 10x return. You're spending 100 million and getting a, whatever the maths is, 100x return, I guess.
It's a pretty legit return. Yeah, definitely. I think it's really just being able to tie all these pieces together. And I think, if there's one thing that I can just kind of share with the industry over and over again, I've been saying this for nearly a decade, is that, we look at the players, we look at the teams, and yeah, they got to be healthy. We look at the TOs, they got to be healthy. But if we look at every dollar that kind of goes in, other than VC money, let's not talk about that for now, but kind of sustainable dollars that go in, it's coming from a brand, right? It's a Verizon, it's an Intel, it's a Coca-Cola, or a Ford or something like that. It's coming from a brand, and they will show up. These dollars show up, in media predominantly, right? Like in an ESPN or broadcast or digital or things like that. Again, media is obviously getting more sophisticated and smarter, or it's showing up in the form of a sponsorship, right? And every brand is looking to be as efficient as possible. 23, 24, let's be honest with ourselves. These are tough years, right? So what if anybody's showing up to a brand, it's not, hey, this is a great thing to do. Yeah. I would get like 18 to 20 great things to do, pitched to me on a weekly basis. It's not that. This is going to be better than any other dollar that you could possibly spend. The next dollar you spend has to be this, because this is how it's going to help you in driving your business, right? And just as a brand showing up to gaming and being disingenuous, and that's super cringe, I think an endemic pitching a brand, and not really understanding business or the business that you're pitching, that's super cringe as well.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, and I just feel like a lot of the times I made some kind of teaser content about this recently on LinkedIn, saying it's like a teaser of a teaser. I was saying I'm working on a piece of content that a lot of VC dollars have kind of over professionalized esports. And what I meant by that, that I kind of clarified in some of the comments, is I just feel like a lot of the time esports needs to be dialed back by 20%. Like we're spending too much on salaries, we're spending too much on prize pools, et cetera, et cetera. And the return on investment would be there if we just spent a little bit less. Like we don't need, $150,000 worth of LED screens on the stage. Like maybe we can just do 50,000. We don't need to pay for flights and accommodation and 4.5-star hotels for all of the players, because they're going to turn up anyway. So why are we giving them the extra money? Especially when we talk about tier 2 leagues and things like that. And that's where some return can come from. And then obviously, some learnings from me is studying more of the way that you're doing it to also generate that better ROI. There's some basic things I've done in the past, like, specials and direct sales and being able to buy things at booths. When we're at PAX Australia, like a 50,000 person event, we could easily sell. I remember we had a line, like when we did a Corsair booth with a retailer, and it was with Intel as well, actually. We didn't have a line of less than 30 people, I think, the whole event to come and buy some headsets at barely any discount and stuff. So there are some direct pathways to ROI there. But I think you need to write an ebook and people can follow your methods.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, I think that's, what's really funny. I love that you said that, Chris, because when I was, kind of building this all out at Intel, like our CMO and that C-suite kept saying, like, build a deck. I'm like, I got freaking decks out of my every region, right? Like I got freaking decks, right? They're like, you need to build a deck so we can all get smart on this. And I'm like, my superpower is learning from the smartest people in the industry. Are you going to come along that journey with me? Like, I don't think so, right? You got bigger fish to fry. So just let me do what I'm doing, because, if I write something down today, and Chris, like I follow your content every day, but you probably would write something today, and then a year later, you're like, that needs to be updated, right? Like, or 6 months later. So like an ebook is great, right? But, the reality of it is, it's the living, breathing learning that's going to kind of keep everybody, ahead of the game.
Yeah, and I guess it's a good time. Once again, not something that we practice, but a good time to plug. And I talked about this last week. So I'm actually planning a seniors only industry event in LA in June time, looking at a venue, a nice central venue from like a FaZe Clan or an EG or someone like that, where I'll be having 2 panels. So it'll be, approved tickets, senior people only, 2 panels. One's about actively spending brands and what they're looking for. So obviously someone like you on there. And then the other one is actively spending investors, where they see the market going, what they're looking for. And then before and after, having a bunch of roundtables to be able to do exactly what you're talking about. And a lot of the reason I came up with that is Lara Kessman, who I mentioned before from the NBL, hosted a couple of esports roundtables in Australia back in like 2018, and they were fantastic. You know, it was moderated by him. The topic was, if we were to get into esports, how can we help? And, you know, the who's who is there. It's not recorded, and everybody feels comfortable to actually discuss like a problem together. And the problem was, we need more money basically into esports. The NBL is fantastic commercialization. How can they help us with that? That's what the end result was. But, you know, the team VCs were there, the owners, the consultants, you know, Intel was there, NVIDIA, top retailers, all that kind of stuff. So, you know, hopefully we can have you along to that event in LA, Mark, and we can, share some of that stuff together. I'd love to be a fly on the wall watching you sitting at a table with, you know, Riot and FaZe and 100 Thieves and someone from Web3, et cetera, and having a bit of discussion about, okay, how do we all make more money together from the brand who's the one that's, you know, putting in most of those dollars, like you said.
Yeah, no, I would love to be part of that. And, you know, I think, you know, that's something that I'm super passionate about right now is like, you know, like how can I help more brands, you know, grow, and also on, you know, so I kind of call the brands like non-endemics. We can argue that to the date, you know, we'll just call them brands. Like we don't have to call them endemic or non-endemic. We'll just call them the brand side. And then there's the endemic side, which are the teams and the TOs and the platforms and everybody. And, you know, like, you know, for me, like I'm happy to, you know, to kind of lean in and, you know, help shepherd, you know, whomever to success. Cause I think one of the things I've had a lot of folks reach out to me, you know, you would think on the brand side, like that makes a lot of sense, but I'm actually seeing, you know, quite a bit of reach out on the endemic side to say, hey, you know, what are they thinking? Right? Like this is a black hole. You know, I'm talking to this person, or I'm trying to break into this. What am I missing in my pitch? What am I missing, you know, to deliver that value? Because you're not there to sell a thing. I mean, you are, but at the end of the day, you're there to solve a problem, and that's going to get you, you know, the sponsorship or the funding the year after, and the year after that, and the year after that. Like, you know, I'll give an example. Intel Inspires. I don't know if anybody's heard of that program. It's a kind of a big collegiate thing in the U.S. I built it as a scholarship program, and really essentially, like I did a ton of research, and the two biggest problems within collegiate esports at the time, and sorry if, you know, people can debate this, or you know, whatever, but just qualitatively, you know, or quantitatively, from our analysis, like the two biggest things missing were students wanted to get recognized for their hard work in gaming, and they wanted to go to school. They wanted to go to college. Colleges were down in enrollment. You know, top 20 universities were down 19 or more %. This is pre-pandemic, right? It's got to be way, way worse than that now. They needed students to come, and they were willing to do pretty much whatever to incentivize students to come. We built this program, 200 colleges started being part of it, but at the back end, we built this infrastructure so that our customers could then sell into those universities, which are really, really hard to get into. And a lot of times you have to knock door by door by door, but we were bringing, you know, 200 plus universities. And because that is sustainable from a business standpoint, it's sustainable from a community standpoint, because we're doing the right thing. That's what's missing in the industry, and we're filling those gaps. It's now in season 3, right? So it's something that continues to progress, because, you know, the pieces are there. Is it perfect? No program's perfect. But was it built with sustainability in mind? Absolutely.
Yeah, awesome, man. Hey, Mike, what's going on? And for anyone else in the audience, you just got to raise your hand, and we'll bring people up for some questions while we continue to talk.
What's up, brother? You heard it.
Hello.
Hey,
how we doing?
Here to say, Mark's a scammer. Throw it all in the bin. None of it's real. Is that what you're here to say, Mike?
No. I hold Mark in very, very high esteem, I have to say. I would love to come in and burst a bubble or throw some shade, but Mark's been the man for the last few years.
Thanks, Mike.
You guys have worked together before, right, Mike, with your esports awards and Mark at Verizon?
We did a couple of years together on the mobile side. You know, we kind of came in and said, hey, you know, this is the fastest growing part of the industry. Let's go. And Mike was like, yeah, let's do it. We even worked together to launch a new product that just came out, which is the Razer Edge 5G handheld device. And yeah, it was great. And then, much to my own surprise, I continue to win esports awards, which, Mike doesn't have anything to do with it. It's all in the panel. But, I remember winning my first one. I'm like, oh, that was awesome. It's never going to happen again. And then it's happened a few more times since then. So yeah, no, we definitely go way back. Right, Mike?
We do at this stage. And obviously I was one of those brands pitching you every other week for a sponsorship at Intel. And was never successful. And actually, there's a really cool story behind how we finally found a way to work together and actually how you built that situation. But I guess one thing I would say, I've worked with over 100 brands from a sponsorship perspective on the Esports Awards. I'd say Mark is one of the very few who has managed to generate more value from us in the value exchange. Because we build very much to deliver a good amount of value back. But Mark always takes an extra inch or an extra mile in some cases in how he builds out the deals, how he finds ways to generate more revenue or more opportunity and challenge us to do better, which is only a positive for us as a brand. Even with the device last year, we sort of agreed an opportunity and then the device became a focal point. And then we found a way of sort of building that into the opportunity and sort of delivering on that alongside the 5G integration. Which is a really cool way. But yeah, Mark certainly got a way of finding a way to find value.
Otherwise, nobody gets the dollars.
Yeah. Well, I think you quite enjoy the competition of it as well. You're very aware of return on advertising. You're great at understanding line by line what a deliverable should be and how to maximize it. And I think actually that was one of the points you were making, Chris, that I think is always quite important is we've worked with 100 brands in the space and it's very evident early on which of them have sort of signed an agreement and think like that's the end of the sponsorship. They sponsor it, they'll get their value. And which of them know, like once they've signed it, the work begins. And that's where they have to start squeezing every single deliverable into their favor and into their sort of prime position effectively. And a lot of the times you'll sign a deal, you'll be really excited, and then you'll find out they don't have an activation team or there isn't a marketing team ready to engage and jump on every social media post and sort of jump on every opportunity to tell a story. Whereas brands that will maximize the opportunities, right? They've signed a 2-year agreement. They have 2 years of association, of rights, of inventory to work against. That's when they need to put that money to work. They're the ones that always seem to do better in those arrangements.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, when you were talking, Mike, I was going to bring up that point. It seems like sponsor activation budgets just simply don't exist for so many of these brands. And it's not how it works in the quote unquote real world, like outside of gaming. You think that Heineken's going to sponsor the World Cup in football/soccer and that's it. Like they're going to spend, as much money or oftentimes even double the money telling people that they sponsored it and activating the actual sponsorship than they are and just paying the money. Whereas you're definitely right. Like a lot of times in experience, they're just like, well, I'll just give this team, whatever the 20K a quarter asking price and they'll do everything for me. It's just not how it works.
It's not how it works. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you got to pace your budget, right? You can't just like, you got $1 million and you're like, okay, I just signed $1 million deal. Like, what are you going to do with that now? Oh, yeah. About that.
Exactly that. But I don't want to gate crash for too long, but I always love telling the story. And what I won't do is mention brands. But Mark, I always thought it was a really good one in how you sort of actually came to engineer the sponsorship with the Esports Awards. Obviously, we'd been speaking for year upon year, all the way back to sort of the start of the awards, realistically. And we had another telecom brand lined up very, very close to the end. Mark moved to Verizon. And like the first thing he did is put like a dart on the board and say, we're going to do something together. And I was like, we're 24 hours from signing a major contract. And literally within that 24 hours, Mark had built out exclusivity of 5G. He'd taken both our mobile awards off the table and had a contract back with us, which was sort of, we're laying down where we are in this market. We're going to be building this out and almost hijacking others' opportunities, which meant the big red brand was visible everywhere.
Yeah, 100%. I don't feel bad about that at all. Like we kick so much butt together. So I do not feel bad about that.
Sweet, Mark. Thanks for coming on, man. Have a good night. I know it's late for you, so.
No worries. Thanks very much. Shout out Mark as always.
Thanks, brother.
Take care.
All right. So if anyone else wants to come up, just feel free to raise your hand. But James, the illustrious journalist James Fudge, what's going on, man?
The
We're
man,
going to grill Mark for a scoop.
Go for it.
Not too much. I had a hard time figuring out the audio on this. I guess it's just kind of automatic. I do have a bunch of questions I wrote down for Mark. Given the state of esports right now, do you think brands expect to pay less for more?
I don't. Here's the thing. I think pricing and when you say like pay less for more, that almost assumes that there's perfect knowledge of what a market rate is within esports and what is reasonable and what is not. I would step back, another click to say, hey, in fact, there isn't that perfect knowledge of like what something is worth, right? Sometimes, you'll get pitched a league, like an esports league deal, and you're like, wow, that's ridiculous. Like, why is it so much, right? Or wow, that's a really good deal. And I think it's still very, very subjective on the pricing. I think, again, I just keep harping on this, and I've done it for a decade, and I'll do it for a decade more, is, esports is still it's a steal, right? If you get the right deal, if somebody comes in and they're pricing things completely out of whack by any stretch of the imagination, then yeah, it's overpriced. Nobody's going to touch it. But compared to a lot of alternatives, if you're able to activate it properly and to monetize it correctly, esports is still a steal. That's the long story short. I mean, from my POV.
Let me ask you something else. Do you think a sponsor is better off with a content creator, working with a content creator, or an esports organization?
Yeah, I think that's the debate. That's the kind of the meta debate that's going on right now, right? Like, going with an esports org or content creation. I feel like the content creator side is a big part of value, whether you are engaging an ambassador directly, right? So if you're going to a talent agency or to, the person's manager directly and you're engaging them directly, or if you're getting it as part of an organization, I think the content creator is a huge, huge part of that value. The team side of things, I think it really depends on how you're activating it. And I'll give an example, right? So where you would want to engage a team, like a CSGO team or, a league team is, you can only have one category sponsor of the LCS within your category, for instance. But let's say you want to be part of that community, you want to be there. You could do it through creators, and you can also do it through, the people who are competing. So we've been able to find some really good value in ambassadors that are part of, they're active players, right? So like Bjergsen, for instance, was one of our best ambassadors. Like he, did a lot of work for us, when he was playing for Liquid, and we kind of treated him in the way that we activated him was very similar to an ambassador, to a talent, or a creator. But his kind of claim to fame was obviously being, one of the best players, out there. So I think it really depends on how your brand is looking at, engaging with the audience. Yeah. Does that answer your question, James? I know, like, we can go on forever on that one, but
right. Do brands typically come in with their own plans for activations and content and stuff beyond the jersey patch way of thinking when they approach an esports org they want to work with, or do esports orgs come with a plan? Like, how does that work your experience?
That's a really good question. And sometimes it's both, right? So for me, if you ask me personally, I come with a plan. So whenever I have a partner, whether it's an ambassador or a team, or any partner for that matter, a league, I would do annual to biannual summits with them, and I would do product road mapping, technology sessions, have them introduced and working with, digital, social, product teams, business units, very, very transparent and working across the board. And I would roadmap essentially, what does this year look like? What are the big beats that we need to hit? How do you fit into those big beats? Because to be successful, you can't be like, hey, I'm selling cars or telco service or computers, come do my job for me. Like if anybody expects that, like that's a problem. Like, don't do that. Because
right.
That team's not going to be good at that, right? Like if they were, they should be a, $75 billion tech company. Like, why are they fielding, league and CS teams, right? Like they don't do that, and you can't expect them to do that. But what happens though is, like, when you start having those really, deep product conversations and business priority conversations, then you can have an open dialogue where the team is like, hey, what would be really cool to execute is this. And then they can then help you land what you're doing. And then it becomes a very collaborative effort.
Okay, I won't monopolize the time here, but I do have one more question. Do you think
let's set up some time? Let's chat. Let's set up some time.
Yeah, for sure. But let me ask you one more question though. Do you think that people that are in your position, at like you are at Verizon, at other Fortune 500 companies, do you think that they really have an understanding of like content creation and esports at this point?
I think in general the answer is no, and that's not throwing shade on a lot of brands. It's a learning process, right? And I was lucky enough that I got on that process, a dozen years ago, even before my decade-long tenure at Intel. Like I was, I came up, like literally out of the dirt. So I was lucky to start doing that, making those mistakes and learning from an early stage. So I think it's like sometimes you'll meet people that, or orgs that are really, really good at it. Brands that are really good at it and are experienced and are comfortable within the space. But I think the majority of Fortune 500s and 1000s are still really feeling out and still kind of exploring the space, and subsequently are not getting as much value as they could.
Yeah, I mean, they're probably, I hate to say this, but they're probably going to like an agency or something and maybe getting bamboozled a little because they really don't know what they want or what they need.
+1 on that.
Right.
Like, yeah, like 100%.
All right. Well, thank you.
I think the thing too is, and I don't want to throw shade on agencies either, because there's not a lot of good ones. There's a few good ones. But like, let's say an agency will come in and they'll do like a couple activations and it'll be like, oh, we're experts in gaming. And you're like, no, maybe not. Like, maybe you're not. But if you're an agency and you're pitching, you're never going to be like, oh, I don't, I'm dabbling in gaming. They're going to be like, I did one thing for a company, whatever, and then I'm an expert. Like that's 100% the way that it's going to get pitched. And I think that's where, the bamboozling, James, comes into play, where it's like, on the brand side, you got to be the goalie to be able to say, hey, this is legit. This is not. You're a trusted advisor, or you're not a trusted advisor, and being able to discern that. And too many brands do go down the path where, they buy what, somebody is selling, but it's not really the best for their company.
Okay, I do have one more question. So, like, for a non-endemic brand, like it's a lot easier for Intel or Verizon to let's say move product or have brand awareness because the demographic that's watching esports or watching people play games, is very familiar with technology and stuff. But in your experience, how much harder is it for, say, like when you worked at Mattel to get into that space?
So I wasn't doing I wasn't doing esports at Mattel. But I'll give an example, right? Like, so if you're doing, like, if you're QSR, or if you are, a CPG company like a Mattel, and you want to get into the space and essentially, sell your products and services to, a gamer or an esports fan audience. I think the biggest thing there is it all comes down to basics in marketing, right? Like, there's no magic sauce, right? What you're doing is you're trying to put your products into people's consideration sets and be ready and available when their buying windows are open, right? And I think that the biggest thing that I've been an advocate of is, if you are, whatever product it is that you're selling, from a burger to a car, you need to be engaged with this audience on a consistent basis so that you don't feel disingenuous, right? I think that's the number one thing, is that they have to care. So, like, would you call, like, Chipotle a non-endemic brand? I mean, given how much Chipotle, this audience consumes, maybe they are endemic, right? And there's a lot, they've done, some really cool stuff, but, there's a lot more that potentially could be done by brands such as that. Even though they're not selling something that would necessarily improve the performance of the player, but it'll improve the life of that player because it's something that they like.
Right. Well, I mean, some brands obviously dovetail better into that demo than others. Yeah, I think that's all the questions I have. Thanks for answering all of those.
Yeah, let's get some time. Let's connect. I mean, we're already connected. I read your stuff, but let's talk.
Yeah, it might feel like a mugging, but okay.
Sweet. Thanks, James. Some good questions in there. Cavadell, hopefully I'm saying that right. Mate, welcome.
Still on mute.
Yeah, still on mute.
Hello, Chris. Thank you for having me on. I didn't expect you were going to circle back to me. First of all, I would like to say a big thank you to you for keeping this space open from time to time. It's been a very huge eye-opener for a lot of us who are on the periphery of e-gaming, although we are in industries that intersect or might intersect with e-gaming in the future. Speaking specifically of myself, I work in the casino industry, and I have been looking for opportunities on how both worlds are going to intersect now and in the future. Listening to Mark Chang has been very enlightening, to say the least. Thank you very much. And if probably now or in future we can talk more towards that area, it would be appreciated. Thank you.
Cool.
I'm sorry I'm speaking so fast. You caught me off guard.
That's okay. No worries, man. No, I think one main thing for me, interested if you agree with this, Mark, I see this in the education space and also the casino space, is that gamers want games that are fun. And most casino games and also most education games, which are actually the opposite ends of the spectrum, but the commonality to me is they just don't look very fun.
Oh, I think that's fair. I think any game should be fun.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I had a call the other day with a friend who's a director at KPMG, and it's the same thing. He said COVID, this is on the education side of things, COVID highlighted just how unfun and unengaging most educational-based games are. And, kids are stuck at home. They need to keep learning over COVID and that kind of stuff, and they're just not engaged. Thinking back to, like, the cool math games and stuff that I played when I was in school, it's basically the same caliber of games that are around these days as well.
Yeah,
and
fair.
if you allow me chip one more thing in, because I know we are being time conscious here. I was on your space a couple of weeks ago, and you were analyzing how the supply chain or the chain in general seems broken, how there are some top earners, and the earnings, it's not fully democratized, if you understand what I mean. And personally, I see in the future probably more partnerships or product development for the casino industry might help alleviate these problems and make the industry of e-gaming in such a way that there will be more resources for everyone along the value chain.
It'd be interesting getting your thoughts on that too, Mark. I assume, Cavito, you're talking about when we're talking about pro gamers, right? With Jeremy and Ollie, talking about like the disparagement between the top paid players and even the second tier or the same players playing in the same teams getting like 10x the salaries of other guys.
Yes, absolutely. That's episode.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on that, Mark, or even just the general health of that kind of ecosystem and how it can improve that. I know it's a very generalistic question, but I'm sure you've got some thoughts on what I've already said.
Yeah, can Chris, can you summarize the kind of your question? I mean, like you kind of summarized it well. Can you re-summarize it again so I can kind of chime in on that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so the chat we had with Jeremy, for example, we were talking about, and Ollie as well, you'll have the same teams playing in, the Intel Extreme Masters against each other. One of the esports organizations on one side will have a full-time chef, accommodation, and be paid $150,000 a year to play the game. And they're playing against a team. Take like Dota 2 as a direct example. There was a Dota 2 team who got into TI who could only afford to eat 2 meals per day. Lived like 5 of them plus a coach plus a manager in like a 3-bedroom house and had to skip breakfast every day. And one of their lunches was like 2 boiled eggs. That's all they could afford. It's interesting to see like the disparagement between different levels of players, or even what Jeremy talked about as well, is you'll have players in the same team where one player will be paid a barely living wage and the other person's on a 6-figure income. Just interesting to hear from you as the industry matures and more money comes into the space. Can we get to that baseline like the NFL where, the basic person in the NFL is getting a $300K a year salary, which is easily livable?
Yeah, I like those of us that have been around, and I've seen your content, right, where you're like, I took all my stuff and I drove with 6 friends, with $3 in my pocket to, something, whatever, 20 miles away or 50 miles away. And yeah, like I think we all came up through some of that stuff. I'm going to take a slightly different perspective, but I won't take too much time on it. Is like, I think this comes down to, sort of the pyramid, the zero to hero pyramid, right? Being a little bit more healthy and robust, right? So if somebody shows up and they can afford 2 eggs and that's it, then something kind of broke along the way, right? Like, you see a lot of, players within professional sports that did have humble beginnings, but they had an infrastructure where they were able to kind of come through, like elementary school, middle school, high school, collegiate, and there was sort of funding at that personal level and the ecosystem level along the way to help, cultivate that talent. And I think, in esports, one of the big things, to kind of counter some of that disparity is actually, healthier ecosystems, along that pyramid before they get to pro. Because I think when pro teams show up like that with such great disparity, it's actually a symptom of something that is bigger across the ecosystem than just at the pro team level.
Yeah, you're right. I don't think I have anything to add. I think you're right. Makes sense to me. A fellow Christopher Bernal. Hello, sir. How are you?
Yes, sir. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, man.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris, for letting me join, and thank you, Mark, for taking the time to kind of hop on Chris's podcast audio kind of show. I did want to say I feel like the last idea you guys were talking about reminded me of Moneyball, right? Kind of not over investing in players. Maybe some people overpay for like a star, but maybe you want to invest in someone that's going to bring you value, more consistency or something like that. But that wasn't my question. My question is more so along the line of how you try to find new strategies, Mark. Kind of how do you try to innovate on strategies you've used before, and what do you do to learn more about gamers and maybe how they want to be engaged? Do you use Twitch often? Do you still game a lot? How are you still staying close to the ground to innovate on what you're doing? Or do you not? Or do you kind of connect with other people that are younger talent at Verizon or other organizations?
Yeah, no, I'm going to unpack all 15 parts of your question, Chris.
Yeah, sorry about that.
So do I play games? I play games like every day. I play games, everything from my phone to console. I have at least 8 consoles. I think I have 3 Switches.
Nice.
I had 4. I gave one to my mom so that she can do Switch Fit or whatever that thing is, with that wheel.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I grind games just like, any other player would. And I kind of rotate through, I'll grind something for 6 months and then I'll switch and based off of my interest and based off of seasonality. That's because, I grew up a gamer. I grew up playing, fighting games and, racing games and all that stuff. Now predominantly I play, FPS type games. So yeah, no, I play a lot, not as much as I want to, unfortunately. But I don't think I could live life if I wasn't playing, it just wouldn't be worth it. Let's be real there. Right. It wouldn't be worth it. I would probably literally quit and just be I need to do something simpler so I can play games. So yeah. And like I said, I got into the industry because of my love of the space. And to answer your question then, how do I stay sort of, close to the ground and understanding? I think it all comes from empathy, right? To really understand and to really be open to understanding what communities are looking for. And there's literally nobody in the world who is oh, I know everything about everything, every single community. It's really, are there 2 or 3 or 4 communities that you're really invested into right now, whether it's for work or personal, and really understanding what's there? What is the news? What's in the meta right now that people are talking about on the pro scene, on the game scene? What are people angry about? Oh, this game is unplayable. Is it really? Or is somebody just really, kind of complaining on Reddit? Understanding and playing and knowing is going to help you do that. And then really talking to people who are smart within the industry, on a regular basis. That's key. I do things if I go to an event, this is something I've done in people can steal this if you like, but I'll do things and I've done this since, early days is I'll tweet out and be hey, first 10 people to DM me back, I'll take you to lunch. I just want to talk to you.
Wow.
And, it's the cheapest, focus group you'll ever get. Right.
Yeah.
And it's understand, I think again, it just all comes back to that empathy and really understanding the people that you are, that you want to connect with, right? What is it that you're missing? What can I do with my resources to help you out? Right. Is it a diversity thing? Is it, back to the collegiate example that I gave, you got to do a lot of research and you can't just go in your gut and be I kind of feel this. It's oh, okay, great. It's understanding the qualitative and the quantitative data and then matching it with the empathy and the understanding of specific communities. Because what works for the Counter-Strike community, that's not the same thing that's going to be cool for, the Rocket League community or, a league community. You got to really understand, I'm just speaking, I'm preaching to the choir here, but I think, when you ask it like that, you just got to be really, diligent and disciplined to really understand each one. And then the way that I approach it is well, what's missing? What can I do? Right. Versus I could just talk about it and be hey, everybody, let's have a conversation. Or I could try to do something about it.
Yeah.
And, when I measure my activations, everything comes back 96 to 98% positive sentiment. And again, this is all qualitative data analysis because it's when you start with that, like, how can people be angry? You know, like when we went to Worlds, we did a booth. It wasn't a nice looking booth at all. But we had Bjergsen, we had like a bunch of the players from TL there. You know, it's kind of a little going away for Bjergsen, but it was like an hour and a half wait, you know, to do the meet and greet. But like, are we delivering what the fans want? Yeah, 100%.
Love that. Thank you for taking the time. Definitely love Bjergsen. Watch him. I'm gonna watch him later today. Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, one last question. Mark, you're a machine. Look at this concise, direct answers. I love it. Brant, what's going on, man? Oh, you muted, Brant. So we can figure it out. Here we go.
Can you hear me now?
We got him.
There we go.
Yes, sir.
All right. Just a couple things. I've not done a Fortune 500 sponsorship, but I had a small credit union, and I was the marketing director, and I sponsored an esports team because I knew the coach myself and was trying to help them kind of get started. But the ROI for us was we had a location on the college, and we'd kind of over the years become distant from them. So for me, the ROI was when the president, was thankful because her son or grandson played on the esports team. So sometimes the value is different. And I also talked to a headhunter for a startup or a pretty big company here where I'm from, tech company, that the esports community in our location, and some of those questions were coming up from, talent, job, people they were trying to hire. Do you see this as esports people age into getting jobs, that there's other values besides this dollar for dollar? So for this company sponsoring some esports, just kind of give them, a reason for people to work there.
I think that, that is part of the reason, right? Like, depending on what your organization is doing, like, we've done a lot of these activations for summer camps, for folks, for interns, giving them experiences. So yeah, 100%. When you said that, like, I was like, oh yeah, no, we've done this example. Like the chief revenue officer at Intel, like, her kid was like a huge fan of Ninja back in his heyday. And I was like, oh, I'm going to have dinner with Tyler. Like, he grew up and, went to the same mall that I grew up, going to, we're going to have dinner. Like, what do you want? He's like, I want a t-shirt autograph. Like, dude, I hooked this kid up with so much stuff. He was going to a new school. He didn't have any friends, but he shows up freaking decked, like in some straight up ninja gear back in his super, super heyday. And like, he went back to his mom and he was crying. He's like, this is the best thing ever possible. And guess what? It couldn't have hurt. But couldn't have hurt. Let's put it that way. When I'm asking for some more budget, I'm like, hey, can we talk about this? The conversation door's open. So yeah, 100%, Brant, you nailed it.
Very good. The other thing that I just would like to mention, I've done here in America, we have what's called Moto America, which would be the American version of MotoGP. And I have some friends that are racers, and I tried to help them with sponsorship years ago. And everybody there was struggling. There's only 2 or 3 people that have sponsorships from like Yamaha and Ducati, but the rest are just trying to make their way. And I did find that more and more brands were wanting the riders to be, full on content creators, marketers, activators. And some of the riders are used to being just like, look, you just put your logo on my jersey and I ride. That's all I do. But I know there a lot of those same people that I was helping have changed, and now they are getting better brand deals, but they are trying to become, they have to learn more about themselves as a brand. So do you think that players should learn more about, some of this responsibility should go to them as well?
I think your question, Brant, is like, should you market your personal brand? And I think for everybody, the answer is yes. Like, look at our host, Chris, like, really good example, right, of marketing your personal brand. Everybody should market their personal brand.
I guess also, but you should have to know how to do a few things. Like, you might have to know how to edit videos and how to create things. And sometimes you're not going to just get paid to play.
100%. Yeah. And that's what I meant. Like I was answering kind of macro. Like if you want to edit your own stuff,
right.
that's great. You can hire an editor, whatever you want. Like, but at the end of the day, like being mindful of who you are and what you represent to a larger audience. Yeah, 100%. Everybody should do that.
Well, cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, something I think you'd like, Brent, too, is like on our Business and Games YouTube, you can take a look at the first audio spaces we did with Ollie and Jeremy, talking exactly about that, like what a pro player should do to be able to promote themselves a little bit better. And Ollie talks about the tough balance between like wanting to be the best player in the world, but also, you know, wanting to be Shroud and streaming to 30,000 people, and like how you find that good balance. And obviously Tens is the best example of that, of anyone in esports, really. You know, who can find that kind of fit. So yeah, man, I think you'll enjoy that. You'll get some good answers from the people who are on the ground doing that if you listen to it.
All right. Thanks a lot, Chris.
Yeah, no worries, brother. Mark, this is the end, man.
Are we going to let Chris ask a question, or are we just going to leave him hanging?
Oh yeah, we got one person. Let's allow him to speak.
Just looking out.
I've got to head off to a meeting after this, so this has to be the last question. Then we'll wrap it up. We'll get going.
Sounds good.
Chris, what's going on, man? Another Chris. This is the third Chris so far. This is the Chris show.
Did you only send out invites to Chris's and then everybody else?
Yeah. Actually, I banned anyone else from joining. I don't know how Brent got in, but won't happen again, I promise. What's going on, Chris? How are you, man?
Good. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I have two questions. I kept it as keeping it as concise as possible. One is, for Mark, do you think games can evolve to be too complex over time? And I'm thinking League of Legends with all its heroes, also a game like World of Warcraft with how much time you have to allocate to grinding gear, and what you're collecting when you're not PvPing. Strictly from a competitive standpoint here.
You know what's interesting is like I still remember like early days of League. I've been working with that title since season 2, and somebody was like, oh my gosh, League is so simple. Like everybody just plays the same map over and over again. Why is this so simple? It's like, you know what? Like whatever you guys call it, soccer, football, whatever, that game where you kick the ball with your foot into a goal. It's been the same for like a century, right? Everybody loves it, and everybody still does the same thing. They kick a ball into a goal, right? Is it easy for somebody to understand and pick up? Yeah, absolutely. So to answer your question, Chris, which, I'm not the expert, from the, making the game side, but I think like the simpler the game, the easier it is for your skills to really showcase themselves versus really being beholden to the meta and the balance of the game. So I would be an advocate for simpler and easier to understand and better. But yeah, you're right. Like, whatever 150 champions or something like that, that's part of, each of the ecosystems, right? Is how to do that, how to balance it. It's part of being the player and the athlete that's competing. But, for me personally, and again, I'm not speaking for the industry, I like simpler.
Okay. Thank you. And one more question. I don't know if this is a term that's coined. I'm thinking like time value of money in context, but do you think the time value of attention or like commitment is a critical element for a sustainable new esport title? Like think of a new title that's coming out, like Omega Strikers is a good one. Do you think, just like what you said, simpler is better? Do you think that's going to be like a critical element in future titles being sustainable? Like Rocket League, I think, is a perfect example of like, a magic combination of like simplistic, but there's finesse, right? So I guess, do you think, I guess, you know what? It doesn't even matter. I think you already answered my second question with your first answer.
I think to answer your second question with one word, the word is fun. Like if the game is fun, people are going to play it. They're going to spend time in it. Like that's the end. I think the beginning and the end from my POV.
Yeah. One thing you're saying, Chris, is low entry with a high skill ceiling, and CSGO is the ultimate game for that, in my opinion. You can have just as much fun in CSGO running down mid in Dust 2, holding left click with a P90 as you can when I was trying to go pro, dry running strategies on Saturday for 12 hours in a row, looking at pixel grenades, developing like 20 different strategies for our split and pick in Dust 2 T side, things like that as well. I think that's part of what you're getting to. And the first thing you were saying as well around complexity versus simplicity of games, it really depends where you want to get to. I've put 4,000 hours into Dota over the past 8-9 years or so, and I'm so entrenched in that game that it's hard for me to go to something else. But Dota was really hard to start, and I'm actually an esports acquisition into Dota. I watched TI3 or TI4, and at that time I was actually playing League of Legends, and that made me quit to play Dota. I've been playing Dota ever since. But sometimes the game is even daunting for me. Like there was a big patch that came out a couple of years ago, and it actually made me quit the game for a while because every single hero had like 3 or 4 changes, plus they added in 2 heroes and they changed the map at the same time. And I was like, I ain't learning an entirely new game, screw that. But, games still have to change over time. Since I quote unquote quit playing pro or trying to be pro in CSGO anyway 10 years ago, I can barely play now because all of the maps in rotation. I mean, Dust 2's been taking a rotation. They're nothing alike. Mirage is basically the same map, but I don't know how to play Aztec. Train has completely changed. Inferno's still there. That's pretty much still the same, but the game is so different now versus what it was. And you'll find the same, like Mark was saying, early League of Legends. I played pre-ranked back in the day, and the game was a 500 megabyte installer/installed piece of software. Now it's multiple gig. It's just such a different game than it was back then too. So some people like that complexity. People love min-maxing World of Warcraft, and they spend their whole days arguing about, the best helmet to go with the best axe, depending on what the situation is, and going over and over and over and over and over that. And then some other people just want to be like, hey, I just want to run down mid with a P90 in Dust 2 while I'm half drunk and have some fun with mates at a, HyperX Arena in Las Vegas or something like that.
Sure. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I've played all those games, and just thinking about because as you get older, you realize how valuable your time is, and there's plenty of players, and I'm a longtime competitive player. I was one of the first 500 league players. I mean, I could go on, but I don't want to. Because these players that are going pro or trying to go pro, as I was trying to win a world championship for 15 years and it just never happened. But, at some point they're going to realize I've spent 10 years of my life and I either got the world championship by now or I haven't. And that's kind of where I'm going with this, the excessive commitment versus a simpler style. And I'm thinking with a couple particular games that are coming up, and it's too early to tell if these games will be well received and competitive because people are so entrenched in a game like League of Legends that has 150 characters or World of Warcraft or whatever it is. So that's why I'm asking those questions, because I'm trying to anticipate. There's a couple titles that are coming out that are kind of in the same space, and just. Some people don't realize the level of commitment that's required to even get close. That's all.
A good point.
I'm done. Thank you for your time, Mark and Chris.
Hey, thanks, Chris and Chris.
No worries, man. Thanks for coming up and asking the questions. Mark, we've got to wrap this up. Where can people connect with you?
Just hit me up on LinkedIn. Hit me up on LinkedIn if you need help, kind of getting into a place or vice versa, hit me up.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks everyone for listening in. We'll be back next week, same time, same place. Probably going to start doing some of these on Twitter as well, just see if there's a different type of audience that joins in, and we'll see what we can discuss. And like I said, we'll have an event coming up in June. I think I only mentioned the senior only event, which is a bit elitist of me. I'm also planning a juniors meet seniors event. I'd like to go to a bar or somewhere more casual in LA, bring a couple of other people, like a Toa Dunn who made KDA and like a Jeff Pabst and maybe a Mark Chang as well, and have more junior people have the ability to come up and ask us questions around professional development or what we think about the industry and that kind of stuff too. So if you're more on the junior side of things or middle level side of things, stay tuned for that too, and I'll announce it. But Mark, thanks so much, man. It's been an awesome chat. I loved it.
Yeah, it's been a blast. Hey, thanks so much.